Audit Committee. Before I start the meeting, can I remind everyone present that this meeting will be live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please ensure that they can be heard and seen on the screen when actively participating in the meeting? At all other times, participants are kindly asked to keep their visual and audio off to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. This meeting will be conducted in line with the standards set by Section 19, Appendix 2 of the Council's Constitution, and I ask that all participants adhere to one speaker at a time. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please press their request to speak button and wait for an invitation to address from the chair. For remote participants, the button is available on the screen. So thank you for that. On to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence.
Councillor Mark Cooper, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any others? No. Item 2 then, the agenda, minutes of the extraordinary meeting held on the 23rd of January 2023, pages 1 to 6 for correctness of the minutes only. Someone prepared to move? Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder, please? Just a show of hand, a hand for a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Prothero, did you want, is that the seconding? Thank you very much. Can I show whether anyone is against? That's the easiest way. If anyone's against, please show. Otherwise, they'll be approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is to receive declarations of interest into the Council's Code of Conduct. Does anyone have any declaration of interest? Councillor Goodjohn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare a personal and prejudicial interest in item number 4. My mother is the chair of Botchell's Community Centre, which has received warm space funding, so I will leave the meeting for that item.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. That's noted, please. Any other declaration of interest? No. If we then go on to item 4 of the agenda, which is the references, cost of living support for food, warm spaces and other means of support, Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, 9th of January 2023. Tom, you taking this?
I am indeed, Chair. Good evening,
Good evening.
Committee. Thanks very much for taking these references. The 2 references that you've got on your agenda this evening, Committee, are as part of our regulatory report tracking mechanism. You'll remember that when we receive a report with recommendations, whether that's for local or national audit work by Audit Wales, we report those to the relevant scrutiny committees, then bring them to your committee for oversight, Chair, with any views from the committee going to Cabinet to approve the management response to those recommendations. That's then tracked on a 6-monthly basis through your committee as part of the self-assessment, and then a mid-year review of all of the regulatory report recommendations. So the first of the 2 references is in relation to that cost of living reference. As you say, it's come from Homes and Safe Communities. This report has also been considered by Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, and I can give you an update on their consideration and deliberation as part of the presentation. So the reason that it originated from Cabinet is because the report outlines a series of activity that the Council has been doing in terms of supporting residents and staff in terms of cost of living. The report then makes reference to a piece of work completed by Audit Wales, publishing a report called Time for Change, Poverty in Wales. That was published in November of last year. It explores the challenge of poverty in the country, and it details a number of recommendations for national and local government. So in Appendix 1 to the Cabinet report, you can see the management response plan from the Council to the series of recommendations from Audit Wales. And those recommendations cover aspects of local strategy and targets as well as performance reporting. how local authorities should be taking the leadership on the poverty agenda, as well as experience mapping to create inclusive services for people experiencing poverty. Make some recommendations around a single web landing page for people seeking help, and committee will be aware that the council has got just that provision on our website. It also then makes some recommendations around streamlining and improving application and information services for people in poverty, doing all of that work in compliance with the socio-economic duty as well. So this report is the first of a series of 3 reports that Audit Wales are planning on publishing around the challenge of alleviating and tackling poverty in Wales. We haven't received the second and third as yet, but we'll obviously bring a response to the relevant scrutiny committees and to your committee in due course. So when Homes and Safe Communities considered the report, they felt that it was important for the council to look at raising the awareness as well, expanding the delivery of warm spaces and related services throughout the county, and to look at deepening such support. We were talking at that committee at not just focusing on the warm aspect, but around ensuring that people felt supported in the wider sense. When Corporate Performance and Resources considered this reference from Cabinet, they noted the response to Audit Wales's report in terms of our action plan, and they requested that further updates or reports to Cabinet on the Council's response to the Audit Wales report would also be referred to Corporate Performance and Resources. The committee expressed an interest in keeping a watching brief on the response on this one, and we'll do that both as standalone reports as required, but also as part of the quarterly monitoring report. So as I say, the reason for bringing it to yourselves this evening, Chair, is to give you visibility of the national study by Audit Wales and the Council's response to that series of recommendations, with any views of your committee being considered then by Cabinet when they're asked to approve that action plan.
Thank you for that, Tom. Are there any questions? No. Tom, can I ask a question? Clearly, a lot of work, this is, a very comprehensive report in regards to what's being done throughout the county. But I was when I read the report, I didn't get a feeling of what the impact was on rural communities, because clearly Penarth, Barry, a lot of the big conurbations within the county borough are mentioned. But I didn't know what the impact on rural communities was. Is there any data on where any of these funds whatsoever assisted rural communities? And if they haven't, what sort of work is going to be undertaken to reach those hard to reach areas? It's okay if you're in a big town or that, but if you're in a very small village, then how can the county be assured that it's reaching those individuals in those areas which may be subject to, the issues you've raised?
I don't know whether Chair Councillor Prothero might have wanted to come in on part of the work around rural coverage, and then perhaps I could add anything to Councillor Prothero.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Gareth. I'm a councillor of one of these rural wards. It does, as some of our rural wards in the Vale, look outwardly quite wealthy, but there is hidden poverty, which myself and also my fellow councillor is aware of. So as a councillor, I think it's our responsibility to try and do something about this, which is what we are doing. We first went to our IT people and we asked, can we have some data to try and have a look to see, what is that telling us about the number of people claiming benefits in our areas, universal credit, pension credit. And we weren't surprised, to be honest, to find out that about 6% of our residents actually are most definitely in food poverty because they're claiming benefits. It is difficult. We are very, and I know, I am on the side of the angel, so to speak, but we are very town centric, and I think it is difficult with that sort of approach where our demographics are most people live in our towns, for us to try and take out of that situation how we need to do something differently when we're talking about rural communities, because the same thing doesn't work. So at the moment, we are trying our hardest to try and create an opportunity in the form of a mobile food pantry for our particular ward, so that we can, at least for what is an inaccessible crisis service for people who live miles from a town with quite limited public transport. And if you had limited funds as well, you're not going to spend it all on a bus to get to a town, are you? So this is our sort of, I suppose, our objective, to try and provide that resource. But you are talking my language. It's something that concerns me greatly, that and more work definitely needs to be focused on just the trying to change our mindset and trying to think outside of the box to deliver differently for our rural communities, and not to forget them. That is another thing that worries me. That
I agree, and I think, sorry, Tom, before you come in.
Sorry, Tom. I'm
you know,
getting off my box now.
No, well, the issue is, and it only came to my mind because obviously I live in the rural communities, and I live in one of those areas where everyone thinks everyone's rich and flush with money.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who are on the breadline, irrespective of the area you live, and that's what concerned me. And the other thing that concerned me was obviously, and which is great what you said, is, are there outreach facilities that could actually address some of these areas? I'm in Peterston, so there are areas around here who've got exactly the same issues as yourself, Councillor Provost. So I think it's just looking at it holistically to say, yes, we can sort the towns. They're easier in some respects because there's a lot more volunteers.
Have we just lost Gareth, or is everybody frozen?
No, we've lost Gareth.
He's frozen.
He's frozen.
Nigel, do you mind stepping in for hopefully a few minutes? I'll try to get hold of Gareth.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine, although I can't finish his sentence for him.
No, of course not.
But he's making me think, from a councillor from a rural community, that there are other rural communities, and I know that we've got within the council, we've got sort of like cost of living groups and things, but maybe we need an independent cost of living rural group to talk about how we can deliver differently and how we can tackle that, because it does need a different mindset, I think.
Yeah,
he's still frozen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joanna. I've got Gareth, you're back twice. I will hand back over to you, Gareth.
I apologise for that, most probably because I live in a rural community. My broadband just went down, but there we are. No, but I think I agree. If we look at it as a county borough issue, then we shouldn't treat the rural communities any different from those big, large conurbations. And again, one of the fundamental things, as you said, is public transport. There's a bus every 2 hours, but if we wanted to get into the Vale, we've actually got to go out from Peterston either into Cardiff or to Talbot Green, and then we've got to go from Talbot Green back into Cowbridge. So it's very difficult on occasions. Sorry, Tom.
I know.
No, not at all, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Prothero as well, because the work that she's just been describing, that she and Councillor Stallard are doing, is really important in challenging how we can really get into these issues, and I'm pleased that we've been able, with public health colleagues, to secure some funding for next year that we're going to be looking to put into developing exactly those kinds of different approaches that meet the needs in different areas of the county. So, and I'm hopeful we're going to be able to get that mobile provision up and running. It's not without its challenges, as we're finding out, but we're determined to make that work. So yes, more on that to come.
Thank you, Tom. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm late on the hand here. Tom, a bit more of a general question. I guess if I'm looking at the proposed actions to the recommendations, a lot of them seem quite labour intensive. And I say that with no sort of count on merit or anything, but just on the resource impact, the financial impact, and how those things are then modelled versus the multiple other priorities that you have? You know, this report comes out, has an impact, and I guess it's partly a question of whether those completion dates are achievable, then what impact they have on the other services and some of the other key aspects of the service, rather than these underpinning things. Or I guess if you could just talk to a little bit to how you've gone through that process to get to this point.
Certainly, Matthew, no problem at all. And I suppose it's important to set the Audit Wales report in the context of the work that the local authorities has been doing anyway. It's a very useful report in the sense that it brings together some of the kind of national observations, if you like, from across the country. So we've been able to see areas of good practice and some really helpful suggestions in terms of next steps. Last spring, I brought together a group of colleagues from across the organisation because I was aware that there's a huge amount of work that is underway across the organisation, but it was in how do we make sure that that's properly knitted together and properly focused strategically on the areas that are of most need. So there's an element of lots of this work has been underway, but it's about how do we bring it and draw it all together, and that's been a really useful exercise, and it's meant that we've in effect, I suppose, got greater bang for our buck because we're making connections between different departments and the different work that's underway, and things like a warm welcome is probably a really good example of that, where we've been able to use contacts across the organisation as well with our partners to very quickly spin up warm spaces, but warm spaces that aren't just somewhere that's got the lights on and you can get a cup of tea, but somewhere there's a positive experience, either in terms of accessing advice and information from other organisations, getting access to food, or participating in activities that come at no cost. So it was really important to us that a warm welcome was exactly that, and didn't feel like quite the bleak experience that otherwise it could have been. Going forward into next year, we've identified in the annual delivery plan 3 critical challenges for the organisation. One is around organisational resilience, dealing with the financial and demand challenges that we face. The second is the longer term decarbonisation agenda through Project Zero, but the most immediate critical challenge is around cost of living. So the anticipation, and I'm meeting with my colleagues from strategic leadership team in the morning to talk about our delivery for next year. Absolutely, this is one of the things that is impacting on our residents and our staff right now, and it's something that as a local authority we need to put a leadership role in. So the report is actually really useful, as I say, in structuring some of that. It also will contribute. I'm very aware that what we're talking about is the short-term cost of living crisis. This report goes into the more deep-seated tackling of poverty and deprivation agenda, which is obviously linked, but it is different. So we've started some work as part of the wellbeing plan with the Public Services Board, and that report is going to scrutiny committee now on the 15th of March. And I'm hoping that once we get that agreed by all of the partners, again, what that will do is start to corral the activity of the wider public sector on some of the most deprived areas within the Vale, so that we can take a more holistic look at tackling that kind of poverty. So I welcome the report and the kind of pace and momentum that having an action plan like this kind of puts into things.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions? Any comments for Tom? No? So the recommendation is, I suggest, Tom, that we note the contents of the report, and if the issues raised regarding not forgetting rural communities, and that could be raised at cabinet level, I'm sure that would hopefully address all the issues we've discussed at the moment. Someone prepared to move then, please, that we note the report and the deal with the rural communities. Someone prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Matthew. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 5, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second of your two references this evening. This one relates again to an Audit Wales report, but on a different subject. This one is around equality impact assessments. They've published, Audit Wales, a report called Equality Impact Assessments More Than a Tick Box Exercise, posed as a question. And the report identifies a series of key areas for improvement. They relate to greater clarity over the types of policy that should be impact assessed, clarity about expectations, to consider the public sector equality duty as part of integrated assessments, better and more timely identification of the practical impacts of decisions on people and how different protected characteristics intersect. Stresses the importance of more engagement and involvement of people with protected characteristics, as well as the better monitoring of the actual impacts that policy and practice has on people, and culminates really in recommendations around a shift in the mindset and culture around equality impact assessments, moving away from seeing them as kind of add-on or a tick box exercise. The report makes 4 recommendations aimed at public bodies. There's one that is specifically relating to ourselves, and that recommendation is that public bodies should review their overall approach to equality impact assessments and considering the findings of the report, as well as the information that's available from the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Practice Hub. So in response to that singular recommendation from Audit Wales, we're committed to undertaking that review of the EIA process within 6 months of the date of the report. So that would be completed by May of 2023. And we would then look to put in place a series of actions to promote the use of the new process within the organisation in the remaining of this calendar year, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions, anyone? No, I've got a question. Oh, Councillor Good, John.
Hi, sorry, Chair. I just got back
That's
in.
okay.
So how are you taking forward the proposals put in this report, which include the suggestions from other councils of what they believe they have been doing well, such as an integrated impact assessment, putting in an online assessment tool, and putting in embedded links to external data sources and other such different things that other councils have been doing to go further?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of taking forward the review, I'm bringing together members of the Strategic Insight Board on the, I think, 14th of March, certainly in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to look at the report in detail and our current process and start to do some of that thinking. Around integrated impact assessments, a number of local authorities in Wales consider equality impact alongside other considerations such as environmental impact, public sector equality duty, and other parts of an integrated impact assessment. To date, we've shied away from doing that on the basis of not wanting to dilute the process of looking at protected characteristics and the impact from an equalities perspective. However, it does feel like the right time to revisit that. We've got some new requirements in terms of health impact assessments that have been introduced by Welsh Government, and it feels timely to at least do a second look at whether the decision to not have that integrated assessment is the right thing, or actually whether the practice has moved on and we ought to be doing that. Our equality impact assessment process currently is semi-digitized in the sense that the information is available on the intranet and it's processed partly digitally. It could be more intuitive and it could make more use of some of the technology that's now available to us in the council since it was last reviewed. So that's certainly one of the things that we'll be looking to do. And in terms of that data or insight piece, Absolutely. That was one of the things that we've been discussing internally recently, is that we've now centralized a huge amount of data for people to be able to get access to be able to look at the potential impacts on people with protected characteristics. So we've synthesized some of the census data, for example. We've undertaken the wellbeing assessment over the last 12 months, and we'll also be looking at doing some further additional external consultation and engagement work in the next 12 months as well. So trying to build up that kind of repository of information is really key, because what it does do is mean that people can spend the time properly considering the impact rather than going to look for the data, which can sometimes be the stumbling block. So yeah, certainly something that we're looking to progress quite quickly.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Goodjohn?
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Councillor Prothero?
Yes, it's a sort of, I guess Tom has more or less answered this, but I'm just curious, when you look at the review of the impact and the effectiveness of your EIAs, do we have data to show that where, you know, an EIA, and we're going back to it's not just a tick box exercise, that actually it has influenced or changed your direction on what you are looking at? Do we keep any of that sort of information?
So I couldn't type and take myself off mute and think all at the same time. I've now taken myself off mute and stopped typing. No, absolutely. The process required, once an EIA is drafted, it's not something that is completed when it's reported to Cabinet or to a committee or appended to a project. The important thing is that they're developed and they become, in effect, kind of living documents that go with the life of whatever the policy and process is. So there's an onus that is placed on those people who are writing and signing off those equality impact assessments to monitor the impact that they've been having over time and to report that that progress as part of regular updates. So certainly we see initially at the stage of an EIA being drafted, that starts to influence policy once impacts have been identified. Then the formalisation of it, when it's reported, looks at making recommendations in terms of how we can change any negative impacts or we can exacerbate any positive ones. And then that ongoing monitoring process should be picking up on that. And that's the responsibility of the officer and the member who's taking that report.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Tom, I've just got a couple of questions. Obviously the recommendation that came out of the scrutiny committee was very polarised in regards to mental health inequality being underreported. And I didn't know whether actually, if you were going to do a review of the EIA, whether you should actually look at all the protected characteristics and actually what, in regard to each of them, what are underreported, because looking at mental health, which presumably will come under disability, is one area, but there are all the other protected characteristics which appear to be sort of missed. So someone's, you know, within education, it is very polarised, but clearly elsewhere, are there other areas which are underreported and actually need to be addressed? So that was the first question. And the second question in regards to the recommendation and being referred to us is that in your report, and I think you mentioned it orally, is that the response to R4 was that yourself and the Corporate Equalities Officer will progress a review of the Council's EIA within the next 6 months. So the question I got, how can we actually give a view or an opinion on this until such time as we actually see what your review is?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the first part of the question, I think you're absolutely right. The scrutiny committee were particularly keen, I think, to make sure that mental health was considered as part of that disability characteristic, but absolutely alongside the rest of the protected characteristics. So I think they wanted to stress that it was important that mental health and well-being, especially of younger people, wasn't missed. And I think we can reflect that in perhaps some of the guidance notes that accompany the equality impact assessment process, and also pick it up as part of that health impact assessment process as well that I mentioned. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. The importance is looking at all of the protected characteristics, both individually, but also then how they intersect, which is a horrible word, but how people can obviously be can have multiple of those protected characteristics. So I think that's the focus of the review. In terms of the second part of the question, absolutely. You'll get an update in terms of what our response has been to the recommendation every 6 months. So when I'm reporting performance on a quarterly basis to the scrutiny committees, we'll be reporting what progress is being made against these recommendations. That will get wrapped up then, Chair, in a report to your committee, both in the autumn and then in the spring as well, where you'll see exactly what's been happening. That would include links, for example, that if we'll have to take the new process through scrutiny committee and cabinet. Indeed, we'd want to do that to make sure that members could test our thinking and scrutinise what we're doing. You would then see the response to that as part of that update to your committee, so you'll get the kind of full picture.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom, and thanks for the clarity, because obviously in regards to mental health, if you just looked at that one area, then you could be discriminatory yourself anyway, because you're not looking wider at every other. So you don't want, the guidance note that you will produce needs to be fairly robust in regards to dealing with that. Any other questions? Any comment? Oh, Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, just one point on what Tom was saying about continuing the review of this policy and continuing review of reviews to ensure that we're making sure that EIAs are definitely not a tick box exercise. How are we ensuring as committees, as scrutinising these documents, that people of these protected characteristics are being heard in the reviews? Would it be possible for us to even speak ourselves to members of these protected characteristics to ensure they feel that they are being taken account of in the EIA review?
Absolutely, Councillor Goodjohn, and the review that we'd be looking to do, we'll start that piece of work internally to get our thinking together in terms of what we're maybe proposing and some of the options that we'd be considering. We've got a couple of established kind of mechanisms then, I think, that we can be accessing. We've got the Equalities Consultative Forum that meets every other month, and that has representatives from different organisations who work in the field of equalities, so either individual or multiple protected characteristic groups. So I definitely want to be talking with them and involving them and the people that they're in contact with as part of the review process. And in addition then to the scrutiny kind of formal member mechanism, definitely want to be involving the member champion group as well. We've got a series of member champions who take a lead on representing different aspects of equalities, either for individual characteristics or for all equality, and they will have a key role in that as well. And that group is relatively new, but full of people with good experience and some good challenge there, so they'd also be part of the review. It's a good challenge to pose in terms of directly involving people with protected characteristics, and with your permission, Councillor Goodjohn and Chair, I'll take that away to give some thought to how we can best do that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Goodjohn. Thank you, Tom. If there are no other questions, any comments from anyone? Nope. Okay, so I think the recommendation again is to note the contents of this report. Obviously, I'm sure Gareth will pick up some points that can be referred back to Cabinet, and we await the next report, which hopefully we will get some progress and you will have carried out that review, Tom. Okay, recommendation then, note the report and obviously the points that have been raised during the questioning that Tom will pick up and refer to Cabinet. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Matthew. Oh, thank you, Councillor Drake. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Item 6 then, report of the Chief Executive.
Last one from me, I promise, committee. This is the quarterly update on the council's risk register, Chair. Just before going into the detail on this particular report, just wanted to flag a couple of the formatting and presentational changes that have been made in response to committee's feedback at our last couple of meetings. So you'll note that the full risk register, which is Annex B, is not included with any printed packs. It's been attached as a link only, but what we've made sure is that all of the pertinent information is in Annex A, which is that summary document. And we've also looked to adopt a slightly more headline-based approach to summarising the changes on risk within that appendix. So I'm hopeful that that's responding proactively to the views of committee over the last couple of occasions where we've looked at the risk register. So in terms of quarter 3, 17 risks on the register, 6 scoring high, 2 medium high, 8 risks being medium, and 1 scoring medium low on the register itself. There's been some movement within the quarter. At our last committee meeting, members were discussing the Project Zero risk and whether there was sufficient capacity, resource, etc. behind that risk. We've undertaken a more detailed review of the risk, including a discussion at the Insight Board over the last couple of weeks, and we've increased the risk position there to a high status of 12, reflecting that some of those challenges that we talked about at committee and also that are outlined in the report itself. We've also, during the quarter, downgraded the Brexit risk from a medium high to a medium status. The report sets out how, in effect, the effects of Brexit are quite difficult to disentangle from some of the other economic developments that we've seen in the last sort of 6 months or so. So actually what we're seeing is that those things are now being experienced by the local authority, but it's not the risk of Brexit per se, albeit obviously there's been some developments in terms of Brexit arrangements in this afternoon's news. But so we've seen that one's come down. In terms of the future forecast direction of travel, anticipating that legislative change and local government reform and integrated health and social care, as well as Brexit, will continue to diminish over time. The report sets out some reasons for doing that. Legislative change, for example, most of the provisions of the Local Government and Elections Act have been introduced now. That was the major piece of legislation being tracked by the register. In terms of integrated health and social care, there's a more established mechanism for doing that now, and I've just talked about Brexit. So that's the reason for those continuing to diminish. In terms though of upward trajectory in the future, we're seeing that financial fragility, Project Zero, information security, market fragility, demand management, and workforce risks are all anticipated to maintain that upward trajectory. Lots of those are interrelated. The report sets out some of the background to that, but those ones we expect to continue to rise and maintain their high statuses. There's been good progress in the quarter in terms of the management plans. 301 of the 329 mitigating actions are on track or completed. There's been some slippage on 17 of those 329 actions. The exceptions then are also highlighted in the report for you, Chair. So that's a bit of an overview in terms of the register.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. Are there any questions? Nigel?
Thanks for the report, Tom, and thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions on it. I just want to say, first of all, thanks for the reduced report, and I think it does go some way to addressing some of the questions and requests we've made previously. So thank you for that. I felt it was far more manageable for my brain in terms of comprehending what was in it. So that was great. Thank you. In terms of some of the questions, the first two are linked. The first one is around, you say in the reports things like the risk has reduced. can we have some clarity? I'm not suggesting now, because I think obviously it'll vary between different ones, but whether that's the inherent risk or the residual risk that's changing, because some of these will be where the inherent risk has changed, and therefore that will have an impact all the way down the line, and it's outside of your control, rather than it just being perhaps where your controls are not working quite as well as you'd hoped, or things like that. So again, just some clarity around that. And the second part, which is linked, is which you've already touched on, is around duplication within the risks. And I think things like Brexit, for example, and the COVID-19 one, you know, some of these are more like business as usual now. You know, it's not something that's just suddenly going to disappear. It's these things are now affecting us ongoing, and as you mentioned, there's quite a lot of crossover with other risks. So I just appreciate your view as to whether any of those are sort of going to come off the list, or whether they'll be sort of subsumed into other risks. And the third one, and then I will stop, is just regarding, we were going to do a workshop around looking at the risk management processes and looking at the risks, and obviously had discussions very early on in the year about, you know, are some of these actual risks or not. I just wondered where we were on that, please. But I'll leave it those three. Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Nigel. Absolutely, we can certainly have a look at how we can present the movement on risks, because you're right, sometimes it's a change in the inherent nature of the risk, sometimes it's the effectiveness of the controls, and it would be useful for committee, I think, to see on what basis are we changing those that residual score, or what's causing or driving that residual score change. So I can certainly take away to look at how we can do that kind of movement on risk statuses. That's no problem at all to do. The second and third questions are kind of interlinked, I guess. Looking at duplication, one of the things that we're going to be talking about as a leadership team tomorrow is what are some of the kind of risks on the horizon, and how do they play in and out of one another. It's quite difficult because there are certain risks that feel like they are standalone risks. So financial fragility is a good example of that. But then that does link to demand management, for example, as well as Brexit, as well as the workforce risk. And it's almost, some of the risks feel like they're standalone pieces. So cyber security or information security, for example, could be seen as one in of itself. The others are almost a kind of web of different facets of a risk that are then impacting us in slightly different ways. So the reason for not progressing the workshop as quickly as perhaps we would have liked is that we're trying to spend some time thinking about how do we actually go about presenting that kind of interrelated or interconnected set of risks. We've been doing some work with the alarm body, that Association of Local Authority Risk Managers, to explore how some other local authorities are doing that across the country, and getting some advice and guidance on the best way to try and present it. So once that piece of work is concluded, we'd certainly look to bring Governance and Audit Committee members together to kind of road test some of that thinking.
Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions. The first one, I think Nigel's covered on the Brexit risk, but I think from my experience in my day job, you'll see that risk, or you've seen that risk disappearing a lot. So I guess same question, but I won't pursue that line. Second one, and I feel like I've probably mentioned this before, so excuse me, and maybe it's one for the risk management workshop, but I struggle to get my head around some of those scenarios where you have an effectiveness of controls risk score that suggests you've got some controls in place, but your residual risk is still the same as your inherent risk. Now, I think that the top one's a really good example of that. You know, you've got a score of 2, a low medium score for controls, which suggests there's some controls in place, but our inherent and our residual score are the same. And I guess I'm trying to reconcile what is it about those controls, other than the fundamental question of why are we bothering if it's not reducing our risk score. What what goes into that calculation? And I appreciate it might be a more complicated answer, so if it's something to leave to the workshop, then fine. But I'd appreciate your sort of guidance a bit more on that.
Absolutely, and I think we can certainly explore it more in the workshop. A couple of sort of immediate kind of thoughts, I guess, more than anything else, is that when we were developing the methodology, there's a risk to the approach that we adopt, if you like, that putting scores on something makes something immediately appear scientific when actually it's about, I guess, illustrating the different extent of risk and the different extent of the effectiveness of things. So whilst it adds up mathematically, I suppose it's trying to express almost an environment of risk and control and what impact that's having. I completely take the point in terms of where you might have an inherent situation and the control score of 1, and then you divide the risk by, or the likelihood by the controls, and then end up in the same position in a residual space as you can do. I suppose there are a few scenarios where it may play out like that. One where we have to have certain controls in place. So we might have statutory duty to do certain things in response to a situation where we might have to provide services in a certain way. But actually, the extent of those to affect that inherent risk is limited, and we actually want to demonstrate that whilst we're working very hard to do all that we can, actually we can't entirely impact on the risk, but neither can we not have those controls either. But I do completely take the point in terms of how representative that feels, and maybe that's something that we could play some scenarios out in that workshop.
Okay, Councillor Goodjohn.
A couple of points. On the register, you've got financial fragility, you've got workforce needs, Project Zero, and cost of living, which are all very high. But I notice on the impacts, you've got them at high and not extremely high levels. And throughout the report, you note how the likelihood of financial fragility makes workforce needs more likely, which makes Project Zero more likely, which makes cost of living more likely to impact us. But I don't think there's quite as much understanding of the compounding of impact one after another. And I think there could be a little bit more work done on that. Additionally, I think there's one thing that I keep missing from the risk register, which I'm sure you've considered, but which is communication. And generally, when I talk to people about the council, one of the biggest problems is that there can be very reasonable understanding as to why certain decisions are made by the council or certain things are done by officers, but there can be a lack of communication towards it. And that's nothing against the communication team, but when workforce needs are creating a shortage of staff, it is creating a reputational risk towards the council, as there is an increase in lack of public trust in politicians, councillors, but also in the council as the public body as a whole. So I just wonder if you had any comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Certainly in terms of looking at the compounding impacts of different risks, that's absolutely something that I want to do. And it is that balance between having individual risks that are meaningful and accessible for members to be able to, and officers to manage and also to scrutinise and oversee. With how you actually demonstrate the fact that these things are all interrelated and do sometimes have a compounding effect. So I think that's something that the next iteration of the approach to presenting the information definitely needs to consider, and that's the work that we're doing with the alarm group. In terms of the communications piece, I think reputation is one of the facets, the 4 facets of risk that we look at when we're developing the risks that go on to the register itself. So you'll see, for example, within the Project Zero risk that there's reference there to making sure that messages reach our staff and that messages reach the community in order to be able to affect the kind of behaviour change that we need, because otherwise there's a risk that we won't meet the 2050 community goal of zero carbon. But certainly, I think the work then in order to engage and communicate most effectively with people is something that's really important, and the council recognises, probably not through the risk register itself, but definitely in terms of the annual delivery plan. And I mentioned earlier that organisational resilience piece. A key part of that is the Participate programme, which is about how do we involve, engage and communicate more effectively as part of the public participation strategy to try and tackle exactly the kind of issues that you've raised, Councillor.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Wood.
Hi, good evening, Chair. I just have a question about, and maybe Tom can explain, or maybe some of the other slightly more experienced risk specialists in here, in that we have 17 risks, and I know we've sort of wrestled with this report quite a few times, and of course, we have different levels of seriousness of outcomes to these things. To my thinking, of course, if, for example, if the council was to become financially fragile, that would be absolutely catastrophic for 4 or 5 of these other services within here. If we weren't able to achieve safeguarding, and people were, so we've got things that are a risk to the council if we don't achieve them necessarily, which are important things that the council has to do. But there are other things in here which are potentially very well, for example, I put Project Zero in. It's a very important target for the council, but it's something that's a target for the council, and we might achieve 90% of it, and that's still a very good outcome. But if the council becomes financially fragile, that is as an example, that is an absolutely catastrophic moment for the council. So I'm just trying to wonder if necessarily we're conflating things we want to do and things we absolutely must do, but allocating them the same risk. And I'm not sure if that's the right way to do it. And maybe Tom has an opinion, or if any of the other councillors have an opinion. Because obviously, if we have schools that are not fit for purpose, that's not only a risk for the council, but it's a very, very poor outcome for members of the public. Whereas the council trying to achieve certain things and missing the target, even if they miss by 10%, is still a very good outcome. You understand what I mean? And so that's where I'm always a little bit torn when I read this report, in that necessary targets of outcomes for the council are maybe not quite the same as things which are potentially very, very catastrophic for the entire operation of the council. I don't know, Tom, if you have an opinion on that, or if I've missed the point somewhat. I may have missed the point a little. I don't know.
I don't think that we grapple with
Tom, you're from
when we're producing the register. Am I back, Chair?
You are now.
Broadband fragility impacting this particular area of Cardiff this evening. My apologies. I don't think you've missed the point at all, Councillor Wood. I think what you've just described is the fact that we've got lots and lots of different services, lots of different drivers, lots of different risks associated with the operation, and some of them are very immediate risks around financial fragility, around the market, for example. Others are associated with delivering on legislation or government direction and things like the legislative reform, legislative change rather, risk over the last few years. That's come down from a really high risk to the authority to down to this kind of medium level, and we're anticipating reducing. And things like Project Zero then is a good example where Welsh Government are very clear that they've set a target, as you say, for 2030 to be net zero, and that's a huge amount of work in order to be able to achieve. So is recognised as being that kind of risk. It's obviously interesting to explore if you miss the target by 5%, that, as you say, you've still done 95%. But ultimately, I suppose what we're looking at here is just trying to weigh up very different aspects of the local authority, but trying to bring them into a central place and give an overview of how they interact. It's not without its challenges, though.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks.
Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with Councillor Wood's points in there that, again, I think it's what we said before, isn't it? It's about understanding what the true risk is and what the impact is on the council's objectives and things like that financial fragility one. We've got the Treasury paper later on the agenda. I can't see the alignment between that risk and the Treasury paper, which I think they're sure there is a very clear link between those two for many aspects of it. So, I'd just like to see that link come out in the papers a little bit more. And going back to Matthew's point around the scoring and making sure those residual risk scores are there, just from my perspective, and gaining assurance over the risks and being managed appropriately is just, what are we doing to bring down those ones that are above the organisation's risk appetite? And I know that's in your controls. What I can't see is which of those controls are really going to have an impact, and therefore we want to be in this committee monitoring those to say, have you done that yet? Has that been done? Has it brought down the risk as we thought it would? I have a feeling some of these might be, seem a bit scary, and actually some of these things we might be able to do would actually bring those risks down a little bit. Maybe that's just my optimistic, hopeful side. But I would hope that some of these maybe aren't quite as big as we think they are, because we're actually the risk description isn't quite right for some reason, or again, this is stuff that we talked through previously in terms of the workshop, and I think that would be really useful to do. But yeah, I agree with Councillor Wood's previous comments.
Okay, Councillor Prothero.
I think I'm going to say more or less the same as everybody else. We've got an awful lot of information, and within that we've got single actions which we can solve, and we have a target date which we have some control over. And then within the same report we've got Project Zero by 2030, which in itself has multiple work streams and multiple actions that we are still identifying to be able to get to 2030. So I guess as we've talked before about this, maybe it shouldn't kind of like be in with everything else. Some of these really, really big projects with lots and lots of different actions that are going to get us to where we need to go. That's all.
Tom, did you have any comment on that?
I think we can certainly look at the way that those supporting or mitigating actions are presented at that workshop. I think it'll be really useful to get an understanding from elected members. It's always the balance of how much do I serve up in the report to give you the assurance that the work is happening, versus not serving up so much that it becomes almost impenetrable then to be able to see the impact that those actions are having. And perhaps there's something from a number of committee members this evening about actually how do we maybe identify a smaller number of actions that are mitigating those risks, but that we try and understand exactly the impact that they're having as a control mechanism on that risk, so that you can monitor them. But it's how we bring all of a very complex picture together in the easiest and most accessible and meaningful way.
Thank you, Tom. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Just a sort of bit of reflection, really. I've come from another audit committee this afternoon at another local authority. Some of the risks, or quite a few of the risks, are very similar. The scoring was a lot higher in that particular instance. But having been involved in, managing risk and also sort of reviewing risk arrangements for many years, the way I look at it is you've got to try and keep it simple, because otherwise if you make it too complex and there's too much stuff for, which the committee has reflected on previously. And I think what Tom has done with his team is certainly helpful in doing that, and sort of reducing the volume of information. There's probably some risks that perhaps can be taken out as we've discussed. But if you just pick the financial fragility one just as an example, because it's such a cross-cutting implications of financial pressures on a council, as Councillor Wood was touching on, really, and that's where you try and reflect the impact and the likelihood there in terms of the extent of the issues. But my take on it is what are the big risks that are likely to impact or adversely impact on the organisation's ability to deliver its objectives, as Nigel has just said. That's the sort of overriding thing. And you'll get individual items, and then you get cross-cutting things. And a lot of those cross-cutting things will be outside the authority's control. It can try and put certain things in terms of mitigation and control. But say if you take the financial fragility one, ultimately, if the settlement from Welsh Government is running below the level of increasing costs, you're going to start to struggle, and some authorities will struggle more than others. You can do what you can to reduce your costs and so on, but that has an impact then usually on staffing, that has an impact on service delivery and so on. So it's a real balancing act. So I don't know whether I'm adding any sort of light at all, but basically I think the purpose of this report is to identify the key things, the key risks affecting the authority's ability to deliver its objectives. It probably could be streamlined a little bit further again, but it's focusing on what the big issues are, or big risks are, which may be issues as well, and what the authority is able to do, and is it doing those things that it's able to do, but there will be things that it can't do anything about ultimately. So I don't know, that's my reflection on the conversation this evening.
Thank you, Mark. Tom, did you want to respond? No? Nope.
I
Okay.
couldn't have summed that up any better than
That's okay.
our head of internal audit.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Just three very quick ones from me, not as in-depth as everyone else is. Tom, the first thing is maybe a presentation issue. There are several cross-cutting action descriptions in the report, namely sort of HR1, which is mentioned in three of the risks. So it's whether or not, and there's another one, which is the HRA 010. So rather than take up 2 pages of A4, whether, presentationally, you just put them at the end to say, look, these are cross-cutting, and we save some paper. Secondly, I was just a little bit concerned about the information security. Obviously, the commentary is you've got to undertake a review of information security against GDPR regulations. No progress on the report. So, where does the council see that in its priorities? And the third one was on the Project Zero, which is getting quite a lot of mention this evening. And it's this action, HRA 017, provide training for staff and members on climate change, raising awareness, changing behaviours and transforming. And then we got no resource within OD and learning to support this action currently. And I think that goes to Councillor Goodjohn's point. If you can't get the staff and the members on board straight off, then, you've got very little chance of getting it outside either. So where does the council sort of see that in its priorities as well? And whether that that should be raised at a management team meeting to say, well, actually, we're trying to promote Project Zero, but we can't even train our staff.
Absolutely, Chair. If I maybe take those in reverse order then. In terms of the provision of training, we've had a number of absences within the OD and learning team. I'm pleased that the majority of those post holders are back in work. We've got a Project Zero board meeting tomorrow afternoon where we're talking about exactly that. So whilst there was a temporary issue in terms of resourcing to provide that, it was exactly that in terms of being temporary, because as you say, we need to make sure that we're tooling up our people with the information and knowledge that they need to be able to go out and deliver those things. And that action is one of the series of different training and development opportunities associated with Project Zero. So we've had people from lots of different disciplines, facilities management, property services, highways, and also from procurement, for example, all accessing relevant training. But it's that one action that is sitting with the central team that had slipped in terms of that piece. The information security risk, absolutely, that you'll remember as a committee we talked about that and part 2 recently. That action plan is progressing now at pace. So whilst this report is as at the end of the calendar year of last year, progress has been made within the first couple of months of this calendar year. And absolutely, in terms of your first question around how can we present actions that are the same action but hit multiple risks, leave that with me to see how we can do that, because it does sound like a sensible suggestion.
No, thank you for that, Tom. If there are no other questions, any comments? No, there are no comments. The recommendations there are: note the Q3 position of the corporate risks, April 22 to December 22, outlined in the risk summary report Annex A, and refer any other comments to Cabinet for their consideration endorsement at the meeting for Cabinet to consider for the risk register for Q3. So I'm sure you can pick up some of those points, Tom, to take to Cabinet. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Good. John, anyone against? No, thank you, that's carried. You can take a rest now, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Item 7, the Financial Management Code Update 22-23. Gemma.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much. So this is the Financial Management Code that was introduced by SIPFA, and we prepared the first review this time last year in February 2022. So I think to a certain extent the introduction of the code was designed to bring together some things that local authorities are already doing in terms of good practice in terms of financial management, but there obviously are areas where we can all improve in terms of our financial management. So I think last year we concluded that we're in a relatively solid position, but we did identify some areas for improvement. So the update we bring before you today sets out the performance during 22-23 and also sets out some kind of prospects for improvement looking forward to 23-24. And the update has been approved by reviewed by our strategic leadership team, and it's also been reported to Cabinet today, and it's now brought for review to Governance and Audit Committee, but also we'll be taking it to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for review as well. During the course of the period from February 2022, we've obviously had some changes in terms of our kind of financial management arrangements. So we've had a change in Section 151 officer, and we've also had the changes to Governance and Audit Committee arrangements. There are some kind of key themes that run through the code. So in terms of collective responsibility, the sustainability of decision making, and the assurances around financial management and the control environment. And I think it was felt that we made some strong improvements, particularly around the kind of budget setting process that was evidenced far more collective responsibility. We had a very involved strategic leadership team that spent quite a lot of time focusing on some specific areas of the budget. And there are various other elements we pick out in terms of the review that's set out in Appendix A. But of course, that's what officers have concluded, and obviously that's been through Cabinet. But we'd be really keen to get comments from committee around whether officers and members agree with the commentary that's set out in Appendix 1, whether there's areas of improvement that we should have picked up that we haven't, or any areas of good practice that we shouldn't have picked up. We should have picked up and we haven't. So just really any comments on the review that comes before you.
Thank you, Gemma, for that. Are there any questions, anyone? Nigel?
Sorry, Joe, I couldn't find the button quick enough. Under section, sorry, Gemma, thank you for the report. I liked the layout of it. It was clear to read through in terms of what you were complying with, why you felt that was important, and then the areas for improvement. So I like the style of it. Thank you for that. Under, as we've just been talking through, under section C, the leadership team demonstrates in its actions and behaviours responsibility for governance and internal control. That obviously is one of the areas where you've mentioned risk and risk management. We have pretty regular discussions about that. I know there's nothing under areas for further improvement under that area. I just wonder whether there should be something around sort of clarifying the bits that we talk through each committee meeting. So I know that is an area that is being worked on as well. So I didn't think it'd be too hard to reflect that in there. Would probably show a bit more continuous improvement, really. But that was just one question from me, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Gemma,
yeah,
happy to pick that up.
Yeah, happy to feed that back to Cabinet and reflect that in the review, and we can reference potentially the proposed risk management workshop that's been discussed today as well. So okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Matthew?
Very, very quick one from me. Echo Nigel's comments about the layout, trying to be easy to follow. Just given, and I'm assuming this is mandatory, I think I read that somewhere, but correct me if I'm wrong. Where we've got those areas further development, it would be useful to have a table or whatever it is of action plan, and when we think we're going to be compliant with those. I think that would give some comfort. Okay. And I guess the other, whether it's a question or a comment, I'll phrase it as a question, because otherwise Gareth will probably tell me off. I guess from a perspective of a lot of these bullet points, they all look great. I guess I wouldn't be able to say whether I fully agreed with them or not. So I guess maybe it's a question for Mark. Is this something that's on the internal audit plan, on the internal audit schedule? How are we getting our comfort that all of these bullet points are? I'm not saying they would not be a fair reflection, but they are. Indeed, we can take our comfort as a committee, I guess.
Mark? Yeah, hey, Matthew. Yeah, I think a lot of these are points that are sort of accumulated knowledge, really, in terms of how the organisation conducts its financial management and conducts its business. So whilst we might look at certain aspects of this in relation to when we do audits of specific systems like budget control or financial monitoring or those sorts of things, otherwise, a lot of it comes through from the annual governance statement as well, and the overall corporate arrangement. So it's that accumulated knowledge, really. But certainly we can look at specific aspects if they were particular areas of concern, and that's something we need to factor in to the plan for next year, including aspects of things that are in the corporate risk register, for example. But for what it's worth from me, what's been presented is consistent with certainly my knowledge of arrangements at the Vale of Glamorgan.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anyone? Just a couple questions from me. I think if other people have covered it, I think the assessment, as you said, Gemma, you would say that anyway, because the officers are doing their own internal assessment. I was just wondering whether there's sort of any learning that could be had from maybe getting these externally assessed or having a peer assessment from another authority to say, well, yeah, just to give that sort of independence in some respects, so that, if there is any learning to be had, then hopefully, both authorities or whatever could learn. The second point in regards to the governance, which is point C, which Matthew raised in regards to the risk register. Bullet point 3 said about the annual chief officer appraisal. In the risk register, I think, which we just discussed, it said that the chief officer appraisal is about to be approved by Cabinet in February 23. And then I think heads of service presumably thereafter. So I'm just wondering again whether that should be in areas for development, given it was noted in the risk register.
Yeah, absolutely happy, Chair, to build that into the amended version, and if that could be picked up in terms of comments back to Cabinet, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Good. What was your view on sort of external assessment or peer?
I'd really welcome that, Chair. I think that'd be really helpful It's always interesting to see how other people approach some of these issues as well. So no, I think we'd really welcome that.
I'm not saying I do it, but maybe someone externally could do it. Well, maybe Nigel or Matthew would put some time in and help out. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, we do also have the option of SIPFA themselves will come and undertake a peer review as well. So I think it's good that we do have it peer reviewed from time to time, perhaps not every year. We can actually look to a neighbouring authority or perhaps SIPFA to do that, and I'm fully supportive of that.
Good, thank you. Any other questions, anyone? Any comments? No, if there are no comments, you see the recommendation that the governance, but the committee is recommend. Well, we review the statement of compliance with the Financial Management Code and the contents review set out in Appendix 1, and refer any comments back to Cabinet for consideration. So if we can pick up those points about areas for improvement and maybe the AP review at some stage in the future. If someone prepared to move. Thank you, Matthew. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Nigel. Anyone against? No, thank you for that. Thanks, Gemma. We're going on item 8 then, the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy 23-24, an update for 22-23.
Evening all, I'm going to take this paper. I hope everyone who was able to attend found the training session earlier helpful. Link, I believe, do a really good job for us and give us good advice. I'm glad to say the team act on that as advice as well. So this is quite a far-ranging set of papers you have in front of you on the Treasury strategy. There's quite a lot of paper there. The purpose of the report is sixfold really, and there's 6 areas just to bring your attention to. So it's looking to endorse our position that we're reporting for 22-23, so the current financial year. Seeks to advise on the specific statutory prudential indicators that we need to have in the strategy. Naturally, we're looking to approve the strategy itself and have endorsement of that from you this evening. And specifically within the Treasury strategy, we set out our minimum revenue provision, the level of which, the rate at which we're repaying debt, and that's a specific requirement. And then also in the pack of papers that you have in front of you this evening are the policy statement and our management code of practice, which are the practices that the team work to on a day-to-day basis. In terms of the interim report, the first of those 6 areas, all the activities in the current year in accordance with the approved strategy, and the monies borrowed and repaid are set out in the report. The indicators, we set out the indicators in the Treasury strategy, and that we aim to comply with the Prudential Code. And to demonstrate the council to fulfil these objectives, the code sets out what they should be used for and the factors that must be considered, and those are naturally part of our strategy. The strategy actually, it was useful this afternoon that the training session pretty much mirrored the contents of our strategy and covered a lot of those key components. So our reporting requirements against the code, the statutory prudential indicators that we need to have, the importance of having Treasury management training. And then I think the important or the particularly interesting bits of the presentation this afternoon were about the economic background and some of the uncertainties we're facing in economies across the world at the moment. And part of that were the prospects for interest rates. And we've seen quite a lot of movement in that in the last year. So currently forecast to peak at about 4.5%. But then fall back over the next couple of years as government or the Treasury starts to take control of inflation. Importantly, we have our balance sheet projections in the Treasury strategy, and we've worked very closely across the 3 elements of budget setting this year to make sure everything's aligned. So making sure that we're looking at our revenue budget and capital programme and Treasury strategy alongside one another. A key element of the strategy is that it actually sets out our minimum revenue provision policy, and that's how much money we put aside each year to repay our debt. And then also in the session this afternoon, we did talk around investments. It's just reminding colleagues that the most important thing is that we have our money returned and that it's liquid and available to us at short timescales if that's needed. The investment income and how much it earns is important, but very much a secondary objective. And again, from the session this afternoon, people will have seen that we only invest at a high level of credit worthiness. The two appendices, the other two appendices to report, the Treasury Management Policy Statement, those are the policies that we work to and they support the strategy. And then the quite detailed appendice is the Treasury Management Practices. Those are the practices that the team work to on a day-to-day basis. I think whilst we wouldn't necessarily bring those here to you on an annual basis in agreeing the Treasury strategy, it is useful for the committee to see them every couple of years or so. So that's all I was going to say in introduction to the paper, Chair. So happy to take any questions, and I do have Gemma here as well.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Any questions, anyone? Councillor Goodjohn.
I do apologise because I suppose this isn't directly relating to the report, but it is a very important part of it. One thing we've found in corporate performance quite often is that there's been quite a bit of capital slippage, partly because of a lack of workforce. And I wonder, when it comes to the borrowing strategy, that leaves quite a bit in reserves that we've been able to invest while we're waiting for the capital to be needed. As borrowing rates come down, and so do investment rates as the bank rates go down, that means that the fixed rates that we're taking the funds from will be higher the earlier that we take those loans. And I wonder what work is being done to ensure that we only take the loans and start paying the interest at the latest possible date to try and get the best possible rate, when we could get capital slippage, I do apologise, capital slippage in that, and therefore wasting taxpayer money if we have to pay interest when we don't need to.
It's a good question and a fair question. And obviously the capital programme has a number of sources of financing. It's not just through borrowing, so it's dependent on some of our reserves. We have money set aside in reserves, and it is grant funded as well. So we will always look to those two sources of income before we go out to borrow. I can't remember if you were on the training session this afternoon, but Adam talked at length about the team's cash flow work. So we've got a really strong cash flow in front of us that we work to. So we're taking account of lots of different pieces of information when we decide whether we need to borrow or not. The one thing that we do need, and I've said this at Scrutiny Committee as well, we do need to have more reliable forecasts of our capital spend. And that's a real difficulty for us, and we're not alone in that as a local authority at the moment. Colleagues in the services really want to deliver these programmes of work, but there are many challenges. As we've said in some of our capital monitoring reports, supply chains are challenged. Often prices come back higher than expected, and we need to re-tender or actually re-engineer some of the schemes. So there's a lot of challenges at the moment, but that's one element we're really focusing on, and actually having more accurate forecasts on capital spend.
Okay, is that okay, Councillor Goodjohn?
Yes, thank you. I just wonder if there needs to be more work on that, and maybe bring it into the next report what has been done on that basis. Otherwise, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions, anyone? Any comments? No? Okay, if I take you to the recommendations, there's a big long sheet of them at the at the beginning of the report. So number one is we note and endorse Treasury Management interim report for period 1st of April, 31st of December. 2, that we endorse the policy for making the minimum revenue provision in 23-24. Number 3, I assume that should be Governance and Audit Committee, is it, Matt? Not Cabinet?
Yeah, you're correct.
Thank you. So we endorse the proposed 23-24 Treasury Management investment strategy, including the following specific resolutions, which are detailed in Appendix 1. They're set out in, I think, 7 bullet points. And then number 4 is that we note the Treasury Management practices set out in Appendix 3. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Matthew. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Good. John, anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Item 9 then, recommendation monitoring. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that one. Hi. Hello, I'm Joan Davis, the Deputy Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. The recommendation monitoring report as presented at Agenda 9 is the report that you would have seen previously, and it's to provide members of the committee with a position statement on the internal audit recommendations made, implemented and outstanding as at the 10th of February 2023. Appendix A illustrates that in respect of the audits from the 21-22 plan, 15 recommendations remain outstanding as the agreed implementation date has been exceeded, while 16 recommendations still have a future target date. Details of the outstanding recommendations are at Appendix B. Of the 56 recommendations made to date in respect of the 22-23 audits, 38 have been implemented. 1 has not been accepted by management, but an alternative solution has been agreed, and 1 recommendation is outstanding. This is also detailed at Appendix B. 16 recommendations have yet to reach the agreed target implementation date. The monitoring of the recommendations is undertaken regularly by auditors, and the internal process is being reviewed to ensure that accurate and timely information is available for reporting to this committee. It is recognised that there is always a timing issue, but this time, due to annual leave, half term, etc., it's felt that the most up-to-date position has not really been represented. Therefore, I'd like to suggest, Chair, that another recommendation monitoring report is brought to this committee in April. It's not on the forward work programme, but I think it would be worthwhile to provide a more accurate position. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Nigel?
Yeah, I've got 2, please. One of them I think is partly addressed by what you just said there, which was obviously it's disappointing to see the chase but no response from the service. So yeah, I think an updated version on that would be good for that. Obviously, it's just a bit worrying to see that. Obviously, we don't know how long they've had, etc., etc. So hopefully, it's just a relatively short-term thing. The other thing we mentioned in the last meeting, it was in the minutes, which was just around having clarification over the assurance levels and what different levels of recommendation meant. And I didn't raise it then, but it fits under this one, but I haven't seen anything on that, so I don't know whether that could still be provided, please, because we did talk about why some audit levels like had, for example, 1 medium priority but was still reasonable assurance. So if that could still be provided, that'd be really useful in terms of understanding how much we need to worry about some of these recommendations being outstanding as well.
Joan?
Yeah, no problem. As I think I mentioned before, apologies that I haven't got back to you, and I will certainly reply to you, but each one is really difficult because there's no hard or fast rule and it's not a scientific kind of calculation or anything, but I'll put something together if that's okay and circulate it, and maybe then perhaps we could have a discussion, because like I said, it's not a straightforward answer, but I will put something out, and I apologise that I haven't done that before.
Yeah, that's great, and I recognise the challenges over that. I work in the area, so we know that it's never one medium recommendation equals this assurance level, but just some ideas about what guidance you use to create that. Like I know MK Insight, for example, gives you a percentage score per audit, for example. So I know there's things you can use like that. So again, just some guidance around how you go about it would be useful, please.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Joan, sorry, I've only just realised this. Otherwise, I would have probably emailed you before. On the detailed recommendation monitoring sheet, I was trying to reconcile those numbers in the right-hand column, the future date total, and I think some of those 2021, 2022, I'm either getting very confused or those totals probably don't add up. And I think you're probably giving yourself a worse picture than we've actually got, because you've got, for instance, I think it's fourth, fifth, sixth one down something, cybersecurity, you've got 5 with a future target date, but none in any of the outstanding. So I guess big general question, are we looking at 16 overdue or 16 for 2021, 22 and 16 for 2022, 23, so 32 in total?
Of the outstanding ones, for example, the one you've just picked up, the cybersecurity. Yeah, I see what you mean. There's a future target date there of 5. So yeah, let me take it away and I'll have a look at you at your query and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Mark?
Just to try and clarify, whilst Joan will come back, but basically the outstanding are the ones that we should have been implemented in terms of the agreed timetable. So it's that box that headed outstanding. So it's saying a total of 15 for 21-22, and there's only one outstanding for 22-23 in terms of recommendations that were the timescale was agreed as part of the audit reporting process. But they haven't been implemented based on the information we've got currently, and caveated by what Joan said around the timing issue. But the future target dates is we haven't got to that point yet. So there may have been, for good reason, they might have been 12 months later before the service said it felt that they could implement it. Does that help, Matthew?
It does, and I am getting myself very confused. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah,
that's all right, no problem.
And Chair, if I can just add, sorry, Matthew, as well. In 21-22, we were quite lenient, whereas they would have had an original implementation date. If they couldn't reach that because they had work pressures and coming out of COVID and working practices, they would give us another date. So those dates have moved forward, and perhaps we were quite lenient at the time because of the work pressures. Therefore, there are 16 still of the 21-22 audits that the target date hasn't come yet to implement them. So we're trying to be stricter on that now moving forward, because we're back to, if you'd like, business as usual, and we would expect them to put the recommendations in place a lot quicker. We're also giving managers some guidance, and if it's a high recommendation, we sort of try and get them to agree that they need to do that immediately, or at least within the month. If it's a medium recommendation, we do expect that to be in within the first three months of the report being issued, and then the low ones a little bit longer. So we're trying to have a better dialogue with managers now to try and get them to understand the importance and obviously the risk of them not putting those actions in place. So I think 21-22 does look quite sluggish, and that's partly because of coming out of COVID, but we are a lot more engaged with the managers now moving forward. But that's not to say we've not lost focus of the 21-22. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. Can I ask one more question, Chair?
Go on, Matthew.
And that, sorry, this is the auditor in me, that really piqued my interest when you said that in 21-22 you added some leniency based on work pressures, and I just wanted to make sure that the leniency you built in was reflective, that you were comfortable that reflected the level of risk and not just the level of pressure in the department, because that probably would concern me more than outstanding recommendations in general. I'll leave it there. I think, as long as you're telling me there's nothing that's concerning you, I'll take that as read. Thank you, John.
Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more from me about one of the recommendations, and I appreciate it's one that says no response from the service on progress, but it's the second to last, I think. Yeah, second to last on declaration of relationships. I noticed the original date for implementation was January 2022. It was a medium priority recommendation. And it seems like a relatively simple one to action as well, in terms of just reminding staff that they should be doing it. Obviously, I think the outcome of this would be also ensuring that people are actually declaring interests. But it's obviously a little bit concerning that one hasn't been done, on the grounds of that is an ongoing one that's now another year out of date. And if people aren't declaring interests, that could obviously be an indicator of various things, but obviously one of those is around fraud as well. So I wonder, have we got any update on that at all, or are we just completely in the dark about that one?
If I can answer that, Chair. No, we've not had a response from the service. That particular service area is under pressure at the moment, with a major project that they're doing, and I've been on leave and been able to chase them. However, we've looked ourselves and we couldn't find any evidence that that message had gone out. But to give you some assurance, we do some work about declarations of interest and code of declarations of and the code of conduct, etc., independently. So although this recommendation is made and we can't see evidence that they've actually advertised and reminded people, we do that in our other work directly with the services that we engage with, but we will continue to chase this up.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Just a couple from me then, Joan. Matthew picked up the issues that I was getting a little bit confused about with the outstanding and the target date, so I now fully understand that. But on the Appendix B, in regards to the first page, and you've got corporate safeguarding, and it's the current position, and it's the final paragraph. It says, due to this gap analysis and then design sourcing work needed to be meet to the training needs, I don't anticipate this being able to meet the December 22 deadline. Do we know when they're actually going to meet that deadline?
No, this is something we need to go back with.
Okay.
It's the section that Tom spoke about earlier that's had a lot of absence.
Okay. The only other comment I would make in regards to these, and it's already been made in regards to chase but no response from the service on progress. This work is ongoing. No response from the service on progress. No response from the service on progress. And the question, firstly, the question is, if they get a low or medium and they don't know anything about it, does it actually mean to them, well, forget about it because no one's going to do anything about it? Because, you know, if these issues keep getting raised, certainly in regards to like the planning ones, declaration of relationships, which Nigel's just raised, and SRS governance, if people are not taking these very seriously, then, you know, it just appears to me, so why bother putting them in there? So I think for me, and this is a comment I'll make to you, is that in the report, which will be the additional report in April, I think the managers of these sections need to be told that unless they're actually going to address these issues, then my view would be is that they should come before this Governance and Audit Committee and account for why they're not delivering it. Now, I'm not saying that's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but someone needs to say enough's enough. And again, the one Nigel picked up in regards to, the January one, enough's enough. So I think perhaps maybe Tom or Matt can raise it as senior leadership team to say, audit and risk are getting a bit concerned now about some of these. We understand, we do understand the workforce issues. We do understand the rest. But someone should actually put some time into delivering some of them. And actually, some of them are fairly easily resolvable. That's my view, is that we'll wait and see what happens in April. But if they continue to come up with no progress, no response, then subject to committee agreeing, we'll call the managers in and the director and let's see what they've got to say about not dealing with them. Matt?
I was going to say very similar to you actually, Chair, but I think what I can do is take this report, or very similar, to senior leadership team next couple of meetings and give them a warning and put them on notice that they might be coming and paying you a visit.
Yeah, and you know, if it's if they want to ignore this committee, then be it at their own risk, because more than likely I'll call in the cabinet member as well and see what he or she's got to say about it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? Any comments? No, you'll see the recommendation then that I think the recommendation is that we consider the information provided in respect to the status of the recommendations made. We'll have the additional recommendation that Joan will bring a further report to our April committee in regards to those outstanding matters, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in April with Matt raising it at the senior leadership team as well. Someone prepared to move the recommendation? Thank you, Nigel. Come on, I have a seconder. Matthew, thank you. Anyone against? Nope. Thank you, Joan, for that. Then we got item 10, which is the updated forward work programme.
Yeah,
Joan?
That's me again. Thank you, Chair. Okay, very quickly, this is the standard forward work programme report that committee are used to seeing. Within the report, there's a list of the proposed items that are to be presented at the next meeting on the 25th of April 2023. There's just been two that were originally timetabled for this meeting that have been moved to the April 2023 meeting. So basically, committee are asked to endorse the schedule of items and confirm any people they'd like to invite or any additional items that they'd like to include. Thank you.
Any questions on this? Obviously, we'll have to include your additional report on that, Joan. But are there any questions? No. Oh, Nigel.
Sorry, I can't find the button again. In terms of the review of the our committee's self-assessment, that's in for next April as well. I just sorry for the April, the next meeting. Do we feed into that process, or is that something that is undertaken based on the data linked to attendance and all those sorts of things and then fed back to us? What's the process around that, please?
Yeah, I can answer that, Chair. Normally we would do a desktop exercise against the various questions, and then we present that to yourselves for comment and input, and then we can go away and finalise it once you've had the opportunity to input to our initial findings.
So would that input happen at that meeting, and then
yes.
it would? Right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joan. I was a bit panicking, thinking I had to write it myself. Are there any other questions? Any comments, anyone? No. The recommendations then are: we note the forward work programme, that we endorse the schedule of items for the next meeting. Obviously, we'll have the additional item that Joan has suggested. We're not likely to call anyone in on this occasion, but you never know. For May, we may have a list of invitees to come and answer some various questions for the committee. Someone prepared? Oh, Gareth?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, just a quick one. Just to outline that the meeting in April is at 4 o'clock.
It's at 4 o'clock.
At 4 o'clock. We scheduled 4 o'clock, yeah, because there's a scrutiny meeting at 6. So we can't meet at the same time. So G&A can brought forward to 4 p.m.
Well, can't scrutiny change their meeting?
Could do. I'm the clerk for that. So, Chair, I'll have a word. We'll see if we could swap.
I'm not being. I just, obviously, I don't know what the members' availability are. Certainly the independent members, because obviously they're slightly different to the councillor members, but they would maybe in the same position if they work or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have a look. I mean, they may sometimes the April meeting scrutiny don't happen because they've done their work programme, so it may be the scrutiny is cancelled. So I'll double check with the chair of E&R, Chair, and maybe we can do a swap.
Okay, lovely. Okay. Thanks, Gareth. Thank you for that. Sorry, so can I have someone to move the recommendation? Nigel, thank you. Can I have a seconder? Oh, thank you, Councillor Good, John. Oh, Councillor Wood, thank you. Anyone against? Nope. that's that. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Mark. Item 11 then. Any other items which the chair has decided are urgent? There aren't any. Then part 2 of the report. Obviously, we're not going to close session, and there are no items which are contained within exempt or confidential. And finally, can I just say before I close the meeting, Mark's on the screen there. This is Mark Thomas's last meeting with us. He will be retiring next month and hanging up his spurs in local government after, I think, 39 years, Mark, or whatever. But,
37 and a half.
Oh, there we are.
37 and a half.
I'd just like to thank Mark on behalf of the committee, and I'm sure members before me, for the excellent work he has done. Firstly, I think he was the first head of the regional internal audit service in setting it up and bringing it to where it is today. So thank you for that, Mark. Thank you for the support you've given to the council and its officers and members in the past and currently. And finally, can I just thank you and myself for all the support you've given me over the years. And I hope that, you know, you have a very restful retirement. I'm sure you've got lots of jobs to do. And you never know, in a year or two, we may see you back somewhere in maybe an audit committee or two, providing your expert support from the other side. So, Mark, thank you very much for what you've done. It's always been greatly appreciated.
Great. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Is that it? Oh, nope, that's it. Well, I now close the meeting then. Can I thank you all for your attendance this evening? Thank everyone for their input. And, you know, I can't say wish you all a safe journey home because presumably you're all at home. But thank you very much for your input and for your attendance tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth.
Thanks very much. Enjoy your
Thank you.
retirement.
Thank you.